My daughter called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness, saying she booked me a full day at an exclusive spa downtown. Manicure, pedicure, facial, the works. She said I deserved to be pampered after everything I'd been through with Dad's passing. What I didn't know was that while I sat in that salon chair getting my nails painted, her husband was at my house changing every single lock. By the time I got home that evening, my own key wouldn't fit, my belongings were in trash bags on the lawn, and my daughter was claiming I'd signed the house over to her months ago. What happened next still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 72 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing on my own front porch, locked out of the home I'd lived in for 43 years. The home where I'd raised my daughter. The home my husband Raymond and I had saved every penny to buy back in 1981. The home that held every memory of our life together. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to help you understand how a mother ends up betrayed by her own child. Raymond died 14 months before that terrible Tuesday. Pancreatic cancer took him in 6 brutal months from diagnosis to death. We'd had a good life together, Raymond and I. He'd worked as an engineer for the city's water department, and I'd been a librarian at the community college for 30 years before retiring. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We owned our modest 3-bedroom house in the Riverside neighborhood outright, had some savings, and Raymond's pension along with our Social Security gave us enough to live on without worry. Our daughter Jessica was our only child. We'd wanted more, but after a difficult pregnancy and delivery, the doctors told us it wasn't advisable. So we poured all our love and hopes into Jessica. Maybe that was our first mistake. Maybe we gave her too much, expected too little, spoiled her in ways we didn't recognize until it was too late. Jessica had always been demanding, even as a child. She'd throw spectacular tantrums if she didn't get exactly what she wanted. Other parents at school functions would comment on how spirited she was, how she knew her own mind. Raymond and I told ourselves it meant she'd be a strong woman, independent and capable. We didn't see that we were raising someone who believed the world owed her whatever she desired. She'd married Derek Hutchins when she was 26. He was a real estate agent with slicked back hair, and an expensive watch that seemed too flashy for someone his age. Raymond had never trusted him, though he'd kept his concerns mostly to himself. I remember him saying once, after Derek had left our house following a Sunday dinner, that the man had eyes like a shark, always calculating, always looking for an angle. Jessica and Derek had 2 children, Lily and Marcus, who were 9 and 7 when Raymond died. I loved my grandchildren fiercely, though I didn't see them as often as I would have liked. Jessica always seemed to have reasons why visits were inconvenient. The kids had activities, Derek was busy, they were tired. Looking back, I realized she was already beginning the process of distancing me, making me less essential to their lives so my eventual removal would be easier. After Raymond's funeral, Jessica became attentive in a way she hadn't been in years. She called daily, sometimes twice a day. She came by the house several times a week, often with Derek in tow. She'd look around with what I thought was concern, commenting on how big the house was for just one person, how the stairs to the second floor might become dangerous as I got older, how the yard required so much maintenance. I should have seen it then. Should have recognized that she wasn't worried about my well-being, but rather appraising her inheritance like a vulture circling something not quite dead yet. She started bringing paperwork for me to sign. Estate documents, she called them. Things that needed to be updated now that Dad was gone. Power of attorney forms so she could help manage my affairs if I became ill. Beneficiary designations for my bank accounts. She'd spread them out on my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with her homework, where we'd had family dinners, where Raymond had taught her to play chess. I signed some of them. I was grieving, exhausted from months of watching my husband waste away, confused by legal terminology I didn't fully understand. Jessica would point to the signature lines, her perfectly manicured finger tapping impatiently, saying things like, "Just here, Mom," and "It's standard stuff. Everyone does this." Derek would stand behind her, nodding his agreement, his shark eyes watching me with an intensity that should have alarmed me. My neighbor, Helen Kowalski, tried to warn me. She was a retired paralegal who'd lived next door for 20 years. She'd seen Jessica and Derek coming and going with their folders and briefcases. One afternoon, about 3 months after Raymond's death, she knocked on my door with a casserole and some gentle advice. "Margaret," she'd said, settling into my living room with the familiarity of old friendship, "I don't want to overstep, but I've been watching Jessica visit so often with all those papers. Have you had a lawyer look at anything you're signing?" I'd bristled at the suggestion. "She's my daughter, Helen. She's just helping me organize things." Helen had chosen her words carefully. "I'm sure she means well, but sometimes family dynamics can get complicated when property and money are involved. It might be wise to have an independent attorney review anything related to the house or your finances." I thanked her for the casserole and made it clear the conversation was over. How dare she suggest that Jessica was anything but devoted? My daughter was helping me through the hardest time of my life. She was being responsible, making sure everything was in order. That conversation with Helen happened on a Thursday. By Friday, Jessica had heard about it. I'd mentioned it casually, saying Helen had stopped by. Jessica's reaction should have told me everything I needed to know. "That woman has always been nosy," Jessica had snapped, her voice sharp over the phone. "She's probably jealous that we have such a close relationship. Some people can't stand to see a mother and daughter who actually get along." She'd followed up with one of her guilt-inducing monologues about how hard she was working to take care of me, how she had her own family and career to manage but still made time for me every single day, how hurtful it was that I'd discuss our private family business with neighbors who had no right to our affairs. I'd apologized. Actually apologized for accepting a casserole and some well-meaning advice from a concerned friend. That's how thoroughly Jessica had already begun to control the narrative. The next few months passed in a blur of paperwork, doctor's appointments that Jessica insisted on attending, and financial discussions that always seemed to happen when I was tired or distracted. Jessica had started managing my checkbook, saying it was too much for me to handle alone. She'd taken over paying my bills, claiming she wanted to make sure nothing was missed. She'd even gotten herself added to my bank accounts, for emergencies, she said. I'd noticed money disappearing faster than it should have. When I'd questioned it, Jessica always had explanations. Unexpected property taxes, home repairs that needed to be done, medical bills from Raymond's final illness that insurance hadn't covered. She'd show me invoices and receipts, though I never looked at them closely. Why would I? She was my daughter. My friend from the library, Patricia Reeves, had invited me to lunch about 7 months after Raymond died. We met at a small cafe near the college where we'd both worked. Patricia had retired 2 years before I did, and we'd maintained our friendship through monthly lunches and occasional movies. "You look tired, Margaret," Patricia had said, studying me over her chicken salad. "Are you taking care of yourself?" I'd admitted that things had been difficult, that the house felt empty without Raymond, that I sometimes felt overwhelmed by all the decisions I needed to make. "Is Jessica helping you?" Patricia had asked. "Oh yes," I'd said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "She's been wonderful. I don't know what I'd do without her." Patricia had been quiet for a moment, then said something that stuck with me. "You know, when my mother got older, my sister tried to take over everything. Said she was helping, but really she was positioning herself to inherit more. It caused a terrible rift in our family. I just want to make sure you're protecting yourself, Margaret, even from people who claim to have your best interests at heart." I changed the subject, uncomfortable with the implication. But that night, alone in my too quiet house, I'd pulled out the folder of documents Jessica had me sign. I tried to read through them to understand what I'd agreed to. The legal language was dense and confusing. Words like grantor and grantee, irrevocable and transfer of interest swam before my eyes until I had a headache. I'd called Jessica the next morning, asking if we could review what I'd signed, saying I wanted to understand it better. Her response had been swift and cutting. "Mom, are you saying you don't trust me? After everything I've done for you? Do you know how insulting that is? I've put my own life on hold to take care of you, and now you're questioning my integrity because some nosy friends are putting ideas in your head." She'd cried. Actually cried on the phone, her voice breaking as she talked about how hard it was to watch me become suspicious and paranoid, how it reminded her of her friend's mother who developed dementia and started accusing family members of stealing from her. Dementia. The word had terrified me. Was I becoming confused? Paranoid? Unable to think clearly? Raymond had died of cancer, but his father had died of Alzheimer's. Was I showing early signs of cognitive decline? Jessica had suggested I see a doctor, just to rule anything out. She'd made the appointment, driven me there, sat in the exam room with me. The doctor had asked me questions, had me remember 3 words and repeat them later, had me draw a clock. I'd passed all the tests, but Jessica had pulled the doctor aside afterward. I'd seen them talking in the hallway, Jessica's face serious and concerned, the doctor nodding sympathetically. When Jessica drove me home, she'd said the doctor thought I was doing well, but that I should avoid stress. That making complicated decisions might be difficult for me right now. That it was good I had family to help shoulder the burden of managing my affairs. I'd felt grateful then.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Grateful that my daughter cared enough to protect me from my own potential decline. Grateful that she was willing to handle the complicated parts of life, so I could focus on grieving and healing. What a fool I'd been. The spa appointment came about 2 weeks after my 72nd birthday. Jessica had taken me out for a birthday dinner at an expensive restaurant downtown. Just the 2 of us, she'd said. A special mother-daughter evening. Derek had stayed home with the kids, though Jessica had made a point of saying how much he'd wanted to come, how devoted he was to me, how lucky I was to have a son-in-law who cared so much about my well-being. During dinner, Jessica had held my hand across the table, her eyes shining with what I'd thought were tears of love. Mom, I've been thinking about how hard this year has been for you. Losing Dad, adjusting to being alone, all the stress of managing everything. I want to do something special for you. A day just about you. About feeling beautiful and pampered and valued. She'd pulled out a printed confirmation for a full day at Serenity Springs Spa. One of those expensive places I'd never have dreamed of going to on my own. It's all paid for, she'd said when I protested about the cost. Hair, nails, facial massage, the works. You have an appointment next Tuesday at 9 in the morning. I'll pick you up and drive you there myself. I'd been touched. Truly, genuinely touched by what I'd thought was her generosity and love. That night, lying in bed in the house that felt too big and too empty without Raymond, I'd felt a warmth in my chest. Maybe things were going to be okay. Maybe I was lucky to have such a devoted daughter. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical for early March in our city. Jessica picked me up at 8:30, unusually chipper despite the gloomy weather. She brought coffee from my favorite cafe. Had remembered I liked it with cream and 1 sugar. We chatted easily during the drive downtown, about the kids' school activities, about Derek's latest real estate deal, about the new restaurant that had opened near their house. Serenity Springs Spa was everything its name promised. Soft music, the scent of lavender and eucalyptus, plush white robes and herbal tea in delicate cups. The staff treated me like royalty, ushering me from station to station. First the hair washing and conditioning, then the facial with warm towels and gentle massage. The manicure and pedicure were luxurious, the technician taking her time to shape and buff, and paint my nails a soft pink that Jessica had pre-selected. Between services, I tried to call Jessica to thank her again, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I'd assumed she was busy, maybe at work or dealing with something with the kids. I'd left a message telling her how wonderful everything was, how grateful I was, how much this meant to me. The massage was the final service, scheduled for 90 minutes. The therapist worked out knots in my shoulders I didn't know I had. The warm stones and aromatic oils creating a cocoon of relaxation that made me drift in and out of a light doze. When it was over, I felt better than I had in months. Lighter somehow, as if the physical pampering had released some of the grief I'd been carrying. I changed back into my clothes, gathered my complimentary tote bag of product samples, and called Jessica to let her know I was ready to be picked up. Again voicemail. I tried 3 more times over the next 20 minutes, growing increasingly confused. This wasn't like Jessica. She was always reachable, always responded quickly. Finally I called a taxi. The driver was a kind older man who made small talk about the weather, and asked if I'd enjoyed my spa day. I chatted with him pleasantly, still floating in that post-massage haze of relaxation, completely unaware that my entire life had been dismantled while I'd been getting my nails painted. The taxi pulled up in front of my house at 6:15 in the evening. The rain had picked up, coming down in steady sheets that made the world look blurry and indistinct. I paid the driver, grabbed my tote bag, and hurried up the front walk toward my covered porch, eager to get inside and make myself some dinner. My key didn't fit in the lock. I stood there in the rain, trying again and again to insert the key I'd used for 43 years into a lock that no longer recognized it. Confusion gave way to alarm. Had I somehow grabbed the wrong key? I checked my keyring, but no, this was definitely my house key, worn smooth from decades of use. That's when I noticed the trash bags on the porch. 5 large black garbage bags, bulging with contents I couldn't identify in the dim light. With trembling hands, I tore open the nearest one. My clothes, my shoes, my jewelry box, my photo albums. The second bag held my toiletries, my medications, my hairbrush, the quilt Raymond's mother had made for our wedding. The third bag contained my books, my reading glasses, my laptop, the ceramic bird figurines I'd collected over the years. Someone had gone through my house and packed up my belongings like I was being evicted. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, praying this was some kind of mistake. The door opened, but not by much. A security chain I'd never seen before held it partly closed. Derek's face appeared in the gap, his expression carefully neutral. Derek! Thank God. Something's wrong with the locks and someone put my things outside. Did we have a break-in? There's been no break-in, Margaret. His voice was flat, businesslike. You need to leave the property. I actually laughed because surely this was some kind of bizarre misunderstanding. What are you talking about? This is my house. Let me in so we can figure out what happened. This isn't your house anymore. Derek pulled out a document, holding it up to the gap in the door. Even through the rain-spattered plastic sheet protector, I could see official letterhead, legal stamps, and my own signature at the bottom. You signed a quitclaim deed 3 months ago transferring ownership to Jessica. The property is legally hers now, and she's asked you to vacate. The world tilted. My vision actually blurred at the edges like I might faint. That's not possible. I never signed anything like that. Jessica was just helping me with estate planning. A quitclaim deed is estate planning, Margaret. You transferred the house to Jessica to avoid probate and estate taxes. It's all legal and properly recorded with the county. My mind raced backward trying to remember. 3 months ago. That would have been right after my lunch with Patricia, right after I'd questioned Jessica about the documents, right after Jessica had suggested I might be developing memory problems. I want to talk to Jessica. My voice came out small and frightened, nothing like the confident woman I'd been just hours before. Jessica doesn't want to see you right now. She's very upset about how you've been treating her. All she's done is try to help you, and you've been telling people she's taking advantage of you. I never said that. Helen Kowalski says differently. Patricia Reeves says differently. You've been spreading lies about your own daughter, causing her stress and damaging her reputation. She's done being your verbal punching bag. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a nightmare I'd wake up from, back in my own bed in my own house with Raymond sleeping beside me. The kids, I said desperately. Where are Lily and Marcus? I need to see my grandchildren. Something flickered in Derek's shark eyes. Satisfaction maybe, or triumph. Jessica thinks it's best if you don't have contact with the children right now. Your mental state has been concerning, and we need to protect them from any confusion or upset. He was taking everything. Not just my house but my grandchildren too. My family, my history, my entire life. Please, I begged, and I wasn't ashamed of it. Please let me talk to Jessica. There's been a terrible mistake. The only mistake was Jessica trusting you not to make this difficult. Derek began closing the door. You need to collect your belongings and leave the property. If you're not gone in 20 minutes, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing. The door shut. I heard the deadbolt slide home with a finality that echoed through my chest. I stood there in the rain, staring at that closed door, at the house where I'd brought my baby daughter home from the hospital, where I'd taught her to ride a bike in the driveway, where we'd celebrated Christmases and birthdays and graduations. The house where Raymond had proposed to me in the backyard under the cherry tree. The house where we'd grown old together, where he'd taken his last breath in our bedroom with me holding his hand. All of it gone. Stolen by the child I'd given everything to. My phone buzzed. A text message from Jessica. Mom, I'm sorry it had to be this way. But you've been so difficult lately, And Derek and I have our own family to think about. The house is too much for you anyway. You'll be happier somewhere smaller. I've opened a storage unit for your things. The address and key are in the tote bag from the spa. Please don't try to contact me or the children until you're ready to apologize for how you've been behaving. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The spa day. The whole thing had been a ploy to get me out of the house while they changed the locks and packed my belongings. While they stole my life. I called her. It went to voicemail. I called again. Same result. I sent a text. Please, Jessica. Please talk to me. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. No response. I called Derek. Blocked. I stood there in the rain for what might have been 5 minutes or 50, I honestly don't know. Eventually, a police car pulled up to the curb. A young officer got out, his hand resting casually on his belt near his weapon. Ma'am, I've received a call about a trespassing situation. This is my house, I said, but even to my own ears I sounded crazy. A soaking wet old woman surrounded by garbage bags, claiming ownership of a property where she clearly wasn't welcome. Do you have documentation proving ownership? I've lived here for 43 years. That's not what I asked, ma'am. Do you have current documentation showing you own this property? I didn't. Because I'd signed it away to my daughter while thinking I was just being responsible about estate planning. The officer was kind, I'll give him that. He helped me load the trash bags into his squad car and drove me to a nearby motel. He even paid for my first night out of his own pocket, which made me cry harder than anything else that terrible day. I sat in that dingy motel room with its thin carpet and flickering TV, surrounded by trash bags full of my life, and finally understood the full scope of what had happened. My daughter had systematically isolated me from friends who might have warned me. She'd convinced me I was mentally declining, so I doubt my own judgment. She'd manipulated me into signing documents I didn't understand. She'd stolen my house while treating me to a spa day so I'd have no chance to stop it. And she'd done it all while telling me she loved me, while holding my hand across dinner tables, while calling me every day to check on me. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The planning, the patience, the cold calculation required to do this to your own mother. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in a plastic chair by the window, watching rain stream down the glass, trying to figure out what to do next. I had my Social Security check, which was deposited directly to my account. I had Raymond's pension, but Jessica had been managing my finances. How much money did I actually have access to? At 6 in the morning, I walked to the bank as soon as it opened. The account representative pulled up my information, and my worst fears were confirmed. The savings account that had contained $68,000 when Raymond died now held just under $3,000. The checking account I'd thought had around $12,000 had been drained to less than $800. Where did it go? I asked, my voice hollow. The representative scrolled through transactions, her face growing increasingly uncomfortable. It looks like there have been numerous transfers to an account held jointly with Jessica Hutchins. Also several large checks written to Hutchins Realty, various home improvement companies, and luxury retailers. According to our records, you authorized all these transactions. Probably had. Jessica would have told me they were for necessary expenses, would have convinced me to sign checks or approve transfers, would have made it all seem normal and reasonable. Can I remove her from my accounts? You can, but any money already transferred is going to be difficult to recover. You'd need to prove the transfers were unauthorized or made under duress. That typically requires legal action. Legal action, which required money I no longer had and lawyers I couldn't afford. I left the bank in a daze and started walking. I had no destination in mind, just a desperate need to move, to not sit still with the enormity of what had been done to me. I ended up at Helen Kowalski's house without quite meaning to. She answered the door in her bathrobe, her face shifting from surprise to alarm when she saw me. Margaret! My God, what happened? I told her everything. The spa day, the changed locks, the trash bags, Derek's cold dismissal, Jessica's text message. I told her about the empty bank accounts and the quitclaim deed I didn't remember signing. I told her I had nowhere to go and less than $4,000 to my name. Helen pulled me inside, sat me down at her kitchen table, and made me tea I couldn't taste. Then she did something I'll never forget. She picked up her phone and called her nephew. who happened to be an attorney specializing in elder law. "James? It's Aunt Helen. I need you to come over right away. I have a situation that can't wait." James Kowalski arrived within an hour, still in his gym clothes, clearly having cut short his morning workout. He was in his early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an immediate intensity when Helen explained what had happened. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he said, pulling out a legal pad. "Every document you remember signing, every conversation about finances or property, everything." I talked for 2 hours. James took notes, asked clarifying questions, occasionally muttering things under his breath that sounded like curse words. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and fixed me with a serious look. "Margaret, I'm going to be straight with you. What your daughter did is legally questionable but may not be technically illegal. If you signed a quitclaim deed, even under pressure or without fully understanding it, that signature is binding. The financial transfers are harder to challenge if you authorize them, even if Jessica misrepresented their purpose." My heart sank. "So there's nothing I can do?" "I didn't say that." James leaned forward. "There are several potential angles here. If we can prove you signed documents without understanding them due to undue influence or cognitive impairment, we might be able to void them. If Jessica made false representations about what you were signing, that could constitute fraud. The fact that she systematically drained your accounts while claiming to be managing them for your benefit could be financial exploitation, which is a crime." "But you said I signed everything." "Signing something doesn't automatically make it legitimate. Let me give you an example. If I convinced my elderly mother to sign over her house by telling her it was just a tax form, that signature wouldn't be valid because I obtained it through fraud. The question is whether we can prove Jessica similarly misrepresented what she was having you sign." Hope flickered in my chest for the first time since yesterday. "How do we prove that?" "We start by getting copies of every document you signed. County records for the property transfer, bank records for all the financial transactions, any written correspondence between you and Jessica about managing your affairs. We interview anyone who witnessed Jessica's behavior or heard her make statements about her intentions. We build a timeline showing how she systematically gained control of your assets." "That sounds expensive," I said quietly. James exchanged a look with Helen, then turned back to me. "I'm going to take your case pro bono, Margaret. What Jessica did to you makes my blood boil. Elder financial exploitation is one of the fastest growing crimes in this country, and it usually happens exactly like this. Family members who should be protecting vulnerable seniors instead prey on them." "I'm not vulnerable," I protested automatically. "You were grieving your husband of over 4 decades. You were isolated from friends and support systems. You were deliberately confused about your own mental state. Margaret, that's the definition of vulnerable. And Jessica knew exactly how to exploit it." Over the next week, James moved fast. He filed an emergency motion to freeze my old bank accounts so Jessica couldn't drain whatever was left. He pulled property records showing that yes, I'd signed a quitclaim deed transferring the house to Jessica, but the notarization had some irregularities worth investigating. He subpoenaed my medical records to prove I had no cognitive impairment that would have made me incompetent to handle my own affairs. He also discovered something interesting. The spa appointment had been paid for with my own credit card, not Jessica's. She hadn't even used her own money to distract me while she stole my house. The credit card statement showed numerous other charges I didn't recognize. Designer purses, expensive restaurants, a weekend getaway to a resort I'd never been to. Jessica had been using my money to fund her lifestyle for months. I moved into Helen's spare bedroom while the legal battle unfolded. She refused to accept rent, saying she was glad for the company and that this was what neighbors did for each other. Patricia visited regularly, furious with herself for not pushing harder when she'd sensed something wrong. Other friends from the library started stopping by, bringing food and books and quiet support. The loneliness I'd felt after Raymond died began to ease, replaced by the warmth of community. These people cared about me not because they were obligated by blood, but because we'd built genuine relationships over years of kindness and shared experiences. They showed me what real love looked like, in stark contrast to Jessica's calculated manipulation. James scheduled a meeting with Jessica and Derek, giving them one chance to negotiate before he filed a full lawsuit for fraud and elder exploitation. I wasn't allowed in the room for it, but he told me afterward what happened. Jessica had come dressed like she was going to a funeral, all black clothes and carefully applied makeup that made her look appropriately sorrowful. She'd brought a folder of documents, ready to prove she'd done nothing wrong. My client would like her property restored and her assets returned, James had said without preamble. Derek had laughed. Actually laughed. Margaret signed everything over willingly. We have documentation. You have signatures obtained through fraud and undue influence, James countered. Signatures from a grieving widow you deliberately isolated and confused. Signatures you obtained while misrepresenting the nature of the documents she was signing. That's a lie, Jessica had said, her voice quavering with apparent emotion. I was trying to help my mother. She was becoming confused and paranoid, making wild accusations about me to her friends. I was protecting her assets, not stealing them. By draining her bank accounts and putting her belongings in trash bags? That's an interesting definition of protection. The meeting had apparently devolved from there, with Derek threatening countersuits and Jessica crying about how ungrateful I was. But James had made one thing clear. He had evidence, he had witnesses, and he was prepared to make this very public and very ugly. 3 days later, Jessica's attorney called with a settlement offer. Jessica would return the house in exchange for me dropping all claims to the money she'd already taken. She'd also require a legally binding agreement that I wouldn't contact her or the children ever again. She was buying me off, offering me my own house back in exchange for my silence and my grandchildren. I sat in Helen's kitchen, staring at the settlement terms James had printed out, trying to decide what to do. The house was worth about $350,000. The money Jessica had taken was maybe $70,000. Financially accepting made sense. But it meant never seeing Lily and Marcus again. Never sending birthday cards or Christmas presents. Never being part of their lives as they grew up. They'd only remember me as the grandmother who went away, who stopped loving them, who chose money over family. What would Raymond want you to do? Helen asked gently. I thought about my husband, about his integrity and his kindness, about how he'd always put family first but never tolerated being taken advantage of. I thought about the life we'd built together, the values we'd tried to instill in Jessica, and how completely she'd rejected everything we'd taught her. He'd want me to fight, I said finally. Not for revenge, but because Jessica needs to face consequences. Because letting her get away with this means she'll do it to someone else, or teach my grandchildren that this kind of behavior is acceptable. James had smiled when I called to reject the settlement. I was hoping you'd say that. Let's take her to court. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In that time, James built an airtight case. He had the spa appointment receipt showing Jessica had deliberately gotten me out of the house. He had testimony from the locksmith who'd changed the locks, who said Derek had been clear that they were keeping an elderly woman from entering her own home. He had bank statements showing the systematic draining of my accounts. He had witnesses including Helen and Patricia, who could testify about Jessica's manipulation tactics. Most damning, he had my medical records proving I'd never shown any signs of cognitive impairment or dementia. Jessica's claim that she'd been protecting a confused, declining mother was demonstrably false. Jessica's legal team tried everything. They claimed I was a vindictive mother who'd always favored material possessions over family relationships. They presented emails I'd supposedly sent making unreasonable demands on Jessica's time and resources. Though the writing style was nothing like mine and James suspected, they'd been fabricated. They even had a psychologist testify that my grief over Raymond's death might have temporarily impaired my judgment when signing documents. But the evidence was overwhelming. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd seen too many cases like mine, wasn't buying Jessica's performance. The verdict came down on a Thursday afternoon. The judge voided the quitclaim deed on grounds of fraud and undue influence, restoring the house to my name. She ordered Jessica to return every penny she'd taken from my accounts with interest. She also made a finding that Jessica had committed elder financial exploitation, which carried both civil and criminal implications. Mrs. Hutchins, the judge said, looking directly at my daughter, you have betrayed your mother in the most fundamental way possible. You exploited her grief, her trust, and her love to enrich yourself. The law provides remedies for such behavior, and I intend to apply them to their fullest extent. Jessica had cried. Not the manipulative tears she'd used on me, but real ugly crying when she realized she was going to face consequences. Derek had gone pale, probably calculating how this judgment would affect their finances and his real estate license. But it was what the judge said next that mattered most to me. I'm also ordering that Mrs. Chun be granted full grandparent visitation rights. Mrs. Hutchins, you used those children as leverage against their grandmother, and that ends now. Margaret Chun will have scheduled time with her grandchildren, and if you interfere with that access, you'll face additional legal consequences. I would see Lily and Marcus again. They wouldn't grow up thinking I'd abandoned them. The courtroom was silent after the judge finished reading her decision. I sat there, Helen holding one hand and Patricia holding the other, and felt something shift inside me. Not quite joy. The damage was too deep for that. But something like peace, like justice, like the possibility of healing. Jessica and Derek left without looking at me. I didn't try to stop them or say anything. What was there to say to a daughter who tried to destroy her own mother? The aftermath took months to fully resolve. Getting control of my bank accounts back, changing all the locks on the house again, removing Jessica's name from every document it had been added to. James handled most of it while I focused on putting my life back together. The first time I walked back into my house, I wept. Not because of what had been taken, but because of what had been preserved. My home, my memories, my connection to Raymond. All of it still here, still mine, despite Jessica's best efforts to strip it away. I redecorated Raymond's office, which Jessica and Derek had used as a staging area for their theft. I painted over the marks their boxes had left on the walls. I planted new flowers in the garden where trash bags of my belongings had sat in the rain. I reclaimed every space they'd contaminated with their betrayal. The first court-ordered visitation with Lily and Marcus happened on a Saturday morning 3 months after the trial. A social worker brought them to my house, stayed for the visit, and drove them home afterward. Jessica had apparently told them I'd been sick, that I'd needed time away to recover. I didn't contradict her story. They were too young to understand the full truth, and I wouldn't poison them against their mother the way she tried to poison them against me. Instead, I made cookies with them. I showed them pictures of when their mom was young, stories about her childhood that were sweet and funny and true. I let them play in Raymond's workshop, where he taught Jessica to use tools and build things. I reminded them, without saying it directly, that family history mattered, that connections weren't disposable, that love was supposed to be unconditional. Lily, who was 10 now, asked me where I'd been, why I'd stopped coming to see them. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I told her carefully. Your mom and I had a disagreement about some important things. But I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped wanting to be your grandmother. Mom said you were mad at us. My heart broke a little. I was never mad at you, sweetheart. Never. You and Marcus are the most precious things in my life. Marcus, at 8 years old, was less interested in explanations and more interested in the woodworking tools. He asked if I could teach him to make a birdhouse like Grandpa used to do. Absolutely, I said, and meant it. We'll make it together. Those visits became the highlight of my months. Every other Saturday, Lily and Marcus would come over. We'd cook together, work in the garden together, do art projects together. I taught them the things Raymond and I had valued. Honesty, kindness, integrity, the importance of treating people with dignity regardless of their age or vulnerability. I never spoke badly about Jessica, never tried to turn them against their mother. But I made sure they knew there was another perspective, another way of being in the world, another model for how families should treat each other. Jessica never apologized, never acknowledged what she'd done beyond what was required by the court judgment. She returned the money in installments, each payment made with visible resentment. At public events where we both had to be present for the children, she acted as if I didn't exist, looking through me like I was invisible. I stopped caring. Her approval, her love, her presence in my life had nearly destroyed me. I didn't need it anymore. I had friends who truly cared about me. I had grandchildren who were learning to trust me again. I had my home, my independence, my dignity. Most importantly, I had myself back. The version of me who'd existed before grief made me vulnerable. Before manipulation made me doubt my own worth. The Margaret Chun who'd worked hard, built a good life, raised a child, and loved a husband through 40 years of marriage. That woman had never really gone away. She'd just been buried for a while under layers of loss and loneliness and misplaced trust. Now, when people ask me what happened with my daughter, I tell them the truth. Not to shame Jessica, but to warn other seniors who might be vulnerable to similar exploitation. Elder financial abuse happens more often than people realize, and it almost always comes from family members. Children, grandchildren, caregivers. People who are supposed to protect instead prey on vulnerability. I speak at senior centers sometimes, sharing my story, teaching people what to watch for, how to protect themselves, why they should never sign documents without independent legal review, how isolation and confusion are tools manipulators use to maintain control, how real love never requires you to give up your agency or your resources. Some seniors thank me afterward, saying my story helped them recognize patterns in their own families. Others share their own experiences of betrayal, of children who saw inheritance as more important than relationship. We form a community of survivors, supporting each other through the complicated grief that comes from being betrayed by your own blood. And in quiet moments when I'm working in my garden or sitting in the living room Raymond and I furnish together, I think about the irony of it all. Jessica tried to take everything from me by sending me to a spa for a day of beauty treatments. She thought pampering me would disguise her theft, would make me soft and unsuspecting. But what she actually did was give me one last day of peace before showing me her true nature. And in destroying that peace, she freed me from the obligation of pretending. I don't have to maintain a relationship with someone who tried to rob me of my home and my dignity. I don't have to include her in my life out of familial obligation. I'm 73 now. My hands still bear dirt under the nails from working in my garden. My home still holds all my memories. My grandchildren still visit, growing taller and more independent with each passing month. My friends still gather at my kitchen table for coffee and conversation. Jessica wanted me to be small, helpless, disposable. Instead, I'm free. And that, in the end, is the sweetest revenge of all. Not that I won in court, though justice did matter. Not that I got my house back, though that security matters too. But that I learned exactly who my daughter was and I chose myself anyway. I chose dignity over family harmony. I chose truth over comfortable lies. I chose my own well-being over the needs of someone who saw me only as a source of resources to exploit. Raymond would have been proud, I think. Not of the conflict, which would have broken his heart, but of how I fought back, how I refused to accept defeat, how I protected not just myself but other potential victims by speaking out. The house on Maple Street is mine again, but more importantly, my life is mine. And no one, not even the child I raised, will ever take that from me again. The weeks following the trial brought a strange kind of exhaustion I hadn't anticipated. Victory in court had restored my property and my bank accounts, but it couldn't restore the fundamental trust I'd lost in my own judgment. Every decision I made now came with a shadow of doubt. Had I been foolish to sign those documents? Should I have seen through Jessica's manipulation sooner? What other vulnerabilities did I have that someone could exploit? Helen noticed my hesitation even in small things. I'd stand in the grocery store for 10 minutes trying to decide between two brands of coffee, paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice. I'd receive mail from financial institutions and leave it unopened for days, afraid of what confusing terms might be hiding inside. The confidence I'd spent 70 years building had been shattered, and reassembling it was proving to be a slow and painful process. James had warned me this would happen. During one of our final meetings after the trial concluded, he'd sat across from me in his office and said something that stuck with me. "Margaret, what Jessica did to you was a profound violation, not just of your finances or your property rights, but of your fundamental sense of reality. She made you doubt your own mind, your own perceptions, your own memories. That kind of psychological manipulation leaves scars that take longer to heal than the practical damages." He'd been right. The practical damages were being addressed. The money was being returned in court-ordered installments. The house was legally mine again, with documentation so thorough that no one could ever challenge my ownership. But the psychological damage ran deeper than any legal remedy could reach. I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Sarah Brennan specialized in elder abuse and family trauma, and she'd been recommended by the victim advocate who'd worked with me during the trial. Our first session happened on a Thursday afternoon in her comfortable office filled with plants and soft lighting that felt nothing like the sterile clinical spaces I'd imagined. "Tell me what brings you here," Dr. Brennan had said. And something about her direct gaze and lack of pity made me feel safe enough to be honest. My daughter tried to steal my house and my savings. I won in court, but I feel like I lost something anyway. I don't trust myself anymore. Dr. Brennan had nodded as if this was the most natural thing in the world. That's a completely normal response to what you experienced. Jessica didn't just take your property. She took your sense of agency, your confidence in your own decision-making abilities. She made you feel like you couldn't trust your own mind. That's a form of psychological abuse called gaslighting, and it's specifically designed to make victims doubt their own reality. Hearing it named, hearing that there was a term for what had been done to me, brought an unexpected relief. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't paranoid or ungrateful or confused. I'd been deliberately manipulated by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Over the following months, Dr. Brennan helped me understand the patterns of Jessica's manipulation. How she'd isolated me from friends who might have warned me. How she'd planted seeds of doubt about my cognitive abilities right after I'd questioned her intentions. How she'd created a false narrative where she was the devoted daughter and I was the difficult, declining mother. How every technique she'd used had a name, a purpose, a calculated effect. The spa day was particularly cruel, Dr. Brennan said during one session. She gave you a gift that made you feel loved and valued, then used that exact time frame to rob you. It's a form of manipulation that creates cognitive dissonance. You can't reconcile the person who treated you to a spa day with the person who stole your house, so your mind tries to make excuses for her. That's exactly what she was counting on. Understanding the mechanics of what had been done to me helped, but it didn't eliminate the pain. If anything, it made the betrayal sharper. Jessica hadn't acted impulsively or out of temporary financial desperation. She'd planned this systematically, deliberately, with full knowledge of the psychological damage she was inflicting. The visits with Lily and Marcus became both my greatest joy and my deepest source of anxiety. Every other Saturday, the social worker would bring them to my house, and I'd have 4 precious hours to reconnect with my grandchildren. But Jessica's influence was everywhere in those visits, in the careful way the children phrased certain topics, in their obvious confusion about why these visits required a social worker, in the questions they asked that revealed what they'd been told about me. During our 3rd visit, Lily had looked at me with her serious dark eyes and asked, "Grandma, why did you and Mom have a fight about the house?" I'd been in the middle of teaching her how to make Raymond's famous chocolate chip cookies, the kind where you brown the butter first for a deeper flavor. The question stopped me mid-stir, the wooden spoon suspended over the mixing bowl. "What did your mom tell you about that?" I'd asked carefully, trying not to show my tension. Lily had shrugged with the studied casualness of a child repeating something she'd been coached to say. "She said you got confused about some papers and thought she was trying to take your house, but really she was just trying to help you. She said sometimes older people get mixed up about things." There it was. Jessica's narrative, planted in her daughter's mind. The confused, declining grandmother, who couldn't understand that her devoted daughter was only trying to help. Even after losing in court, even after a judge had explicitly found that Jessica had committed fraud and exploitation, she was still spinning the story to make herself the victim. I'd taken a deep breath, chosen my words carefully. "Lily, your mom and I had a serious disagreement about some legal documents. A judge looked at all the evidence and made a decision about who was right. But you know what? That's grown-up business, and it's not your responsibility to understand all the details or take sides. What matters is that I love you, and I'm grateful we get to spend time together." Lily had nodded, apparently satisfied, and we'd gone back to making cookies. But the exchange had left me shaken. Jessica was still controlling the narrative, still trying to undermine my relationship with my grandchildren through subtle manipulation and planted suggestions. Marcus was easier in some ways, being younger and less interested in the complicated dynamics between adults. He mostly wanted to work with tools in Raymond's workshop, building simple projects and asking endless questions about how things worked. I taught him to measure twice and cut once, to respect the tools and the wood, to take pride in creating something with his own hands. "Mom says Grandpa wasn't very good at building things," Marcus said once while we were sanding a birdhouse he'd constructed. "She says he wasted a lot of money on tools he didn't know how to use." I'd felt anger flash hot in my chest. Raymond had been a skilled carpenter, had built half the furniture in our house, had taught Jessica herself how to use those same tools. But she was rewriting that history too, diminishing her father's memory to serve whatever narrative suited her current purposes. Your grandpa was an excellent carpenter, I'd said firmly. He built the bookshelf in your old playroom, and the hope chest your mom keeps her winter blankets in, and the desk where she probably does her bills. He taught your mom everything she knows about woodworking when she was about your age. Marcus had looked confused, processing this contradiction between what his mother had told him and what I was saying. I could see him trying to figure out who to believe, and it broke my heart that he had to make that choice at 8 years old. Reclaiming a piece of myself, like proving that she hadn't won, that I could recover from what she'd done. But money alone couldn't fix everything. The relationship with Jessica was beyond repair, and I'd made peace with that. She was my daughter biologically, but she'd forfeited any claim to being my family through her actions. Real family doesn't systematically exploit the people they're supposed to protect. The harder loss was the damage to my relationship with Lily and Marcus. Despite the court-ordered visitation, despite my best efforts to rebuild trust, there was a wariness in their eyes that hadn't been there before. They loved me, I could feel that, but they also knew I was at the center of some adult conflict they didn't fully understand. And Jessica was making sure they blamed me for that conflict, subtly and constantly undermining my relationship with them. During one visit, about 6 months after the trial, Lily had brought a school project about family trees. She'd drawn a beautiful diagram with branches and leaves representing different family members. Raymond was there, labeled as Grandpa who died. Jessica and Derek were there with a heart drawn around them. Lily and Marcus occupied prominent positions. I was there too, but off to the side, connected by a thin line that looked almost like an afterthought. And there was a note next to my name in Lily's careful handwriting. Grandma Margaret who we see sometimes. Grandma Margaret who we see sometimes. Not Grandma who loves us. Not Grandma who we visit every other week. Not Grandma who teaches us to bake and build and garden. Just Grandma who we see sometimes, like a distant relative obligated into their lives, rather than someone central to their family. I'd stared at that family tree for a long time, feeling the weight of what Jessica had stolen from me. Not just money or property, but my place in my grandchildren's lives. She'd successfully repositioned me as peripheral, someone to be tolerated rather than cherished. This is a beautiful family tree, I told Lily, keeping my voice steady. You did a wonderful job with all the details. Do you like where I put you? Lily had asked, and I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. She knew something was wrong but couldn't articulate what. I'm grateful to be included at all, I'd said honestly. Family trees can be complicated, and everyone has their own way of seeing how the branches connect. After that visit, I'd sat in my car for 20 minutes before driving home, crying tears I didn't want the children or the social worker to see. This was what Jessica had done. She'd taken 2 children who used to run to me with open arms and turned them into careful, guarded visitors who saw me as a problem rather than a refuge. Dr. Brennan helped me process the ongoing grief of losing that relationship, even as I was technically maintaining visitation rights. You're experiencing what's called ambiguous loss, she explained. Lily and Marcus are physically present in your life, but the relationship you had with them is gone. That's a particularly painful kind of loss because there's no closure, no clear ending. You're constantly confronted with what you've lost while trying to build something new from the rubble. That description felt exactly right. Every visit was a reminder of what used to be easy and natural but was now forced and awkward. The spontaneous affection had been replaced by careful politeness. The intimate knowledge of their daily lives had been replaced by surface-level updates they shared because the social worker was there expecting them to engage with me. I started documenting the ways Jessica was violating the spirit, if not the letter of the visitation agreement. The comments the children made that revealed she was talking negatively about me. The times they arrived with homework excuses for why they couldn't stay the full 4 hours. The occasions when Jessica or Derek would call during our visits on the children's cell phones, interrupting our time together with urgent matters that somehow always required immediate attention. James compiled these incidents into a motion requesting that the court modify the visitation order to include specific language about not disparaging me to the children, and not interfering with scheduled visits. The hearing was scheduled for 3 months out, which meant 3 more months of Jessica slowly poisoning my grandchildren against me. In the meantime, I focused on making our visits as meaningful as possible despite the constraints. I created a memory book for each child, filling it with stories about their grandpa Raymond, about their mom when she was young and still capable of genuine love, about our family history. I wanted them to have these stories even if Jessica tried to erase them. I taught Marcus advanced woodworking techniques, graduating him from simple birdhouses to actual furniture pieces. He built a small stool for his room, sanding and staining it himself, glowing with pride at his creation. I took photos of him with his finished project and made copies, one for him and one for my records in case Jessica tried to claim I wasn't providing meaningful engagement during our visits. I worked with Lily on her writing, helping her craft short stories and poetry. She had a real These moments of discovering Jessica's ongoing manipulation happened regularly. Small comments from the children that revealed the poison she was still dripping into their understanding of their family history. The day Lily mentioned that Mom said I'd always been jealous of her success. The afternoon Marcus asked why I'd stopped loving their family. The visit where Lily wanted to know if it was true that I'd tried to make Mom give me all her money. Each revelation was like a small knife wound, the kind that doesn't seem serious until you realize you're covered in hundreds of them. I never contradicted Jessica directly to the children. Dr. Brennan had advised against putting them in the middle more than they already were. Instead, I focused on showing them who I actually was through my actions, through the time we spent together, through the love and attention I gave them without conditions or manipulation. But it was exhausting. Every visit required emotional preparation, careful navigation of loaded topics, constant vigilance about not saying anything Jessica could use against me in future legal proceedings. The court-ordered visitation was a gift, but it came with strings attached and landmines buried throughout. The financial recovery took longer than James had initially estimated. Jessica fought every installment payment, claiming financial hardship, requesting reduced amounts, asking for extended timelines. Her attorney filed motion after motion trying to reduce the judgment or spread the payments over a longer period. Each filing required a response from James, which meant more time and more legal work. James continued to represent me pro bono, which was the only reason I could afford to keep fighting. But I felt guilty about the hours he was spending on my case when he could have been taking paying clients. I tried to express this once and he'd waved it off. "Margaret, you're helping me as much as I'm helping you. Your case is going to be part of a law journal article I'm writing about elder financial exploitation. You're also a perfect example to show other attorneys why this kind of case matters." And frankly, taking down people like Jessica is why I got into elder law in the first place. Still, I tried to minimize the burden I was placing on him. I kept meticulous records of every interaction with Jessica, every late or missing payment, every violation of the visitation agreement. I organized documents, prepared timelines, did whatever administrative work I could to reduce the hours James had to bill. The financial drain Jessica had caused had long-term consequences beyond just the missing money. The $70,000 she'd taken had included money I'd been setting aside for home repairs and eventual medical expenses. Now, approaching my mid-70s, I was acutely aware that I needed to rebuild that cushion. I started taking on small jobs to supplement my Social Security and Raymond's pension, tutoring students in reading and study skills, something I could do from home using the expertise I'd built during my years as a librarian, editing academic papers for graduate students at the local university, even some basic bookkeeping for a few small businesses in the neighborhood who needed part-time help but couldn't afford a full-time accountant. The work was manageable and actually felt good. It gave me purpose beyond just surviving what Jessica had done to me. It reminded me that I had skills and value beyond being someone's mother or someone's victim. The students I tutored improved their grades. The papers I edited got accepted to journals. The small businesses I helped stayed organized and solvent. Helen worried I was taking on too much. "Margaret, you're 73 years old. You should be enjoying your retirement, not working multiple jobs to recover from what your daughter stole." She wasn't wrong, but sitting idle felt worse. The work kept my mind occupied, kept me from dwelling on the betrayal, kept me connected to the world in a way that felt meaningful. The first payment from Jessica arrived 4 months after the judgment, and it was short by $3,000. James immediately filed a motion for contempt, and we ended up back in court. Jessica arrived with tears and explanations about unexpected expenses and Derek's real estate sales being down. The judge wasn't sympathetic. "Mrs. Hutchins, this is a court-ordered payment. Your personal financial difficulties don't exempt you from meeting your legal obligations. You have 2 weeks to make up the shortfall, or I'll consider further sanctions including wage garnishment." Watching Jessica cry those manipulative tears in court, trying to garner sympathy from a judge who'd already seen through her act, brought me an unexpected sense of peace. She was losing. Not just the legal battle but her ability to control the narrative, to make people believe her version of events. The mask was slipping, and people were seeing who she really was underneath. The corrected payment arrived within the 2-week deadline, and a pattern was established. Jessica would be late or short with a payment, James would file a motion, we'd end up in court, and the judge would order compliance. It was tedious and exhausting, but it was working. The money was slowly being returned. I used the payments to rebuild my emergency fund, to make needed repairs to the house, to establish the kind of financial security I'd had before Jessica destroyed it. Every deposit felt like 10-year-old. We created a journal together where she could write freely, and I promised her it was private, that I wouldn't read anything she didn't want to share. One day she did share something. A poem she'd written titled 2 Homes. In one home, everything is perfect. The walls are white and the carpet is clean. Nobody raises their voice or forgets the rules. But it feels like living in a museum where I'm afraid to touch anything. In the other home, things are comfortable and old. The furniture has scratches and the wallpaper has faded. But the cookies taste like love and the stories are all true. In that home I can breathe. I'd read that poem 3 times, my eyes filling with tears at both the beauty of her writing and the sadness of what it revealed. This child was living between 2 worlds, unable to fully relax in either one. Jessica's house was the museum where perfection was enforced. Mine was the place where she could breathe, but only every other week, only for 4 hours, only under supervision. "Lily, this is beautiful," I told her. "You have a real gift for expressing complex feelings. Can I keep coming here?" she'd asked suddenly. "When I turn 18 and the court stuff ends, can I still visit?" The question had pierced my heart. She was already thinking about the court order ending, about the possibility that these visits might stop. And she was asking for reassurance that I'd still want her even then. "Yes," I'd said firmly. "When you're 18, you can make your own choices about who you spend time with. And I will always want to spend time with you. This home, this relationship, it's here for as long as you want it." She'd hugged me then, really hugged me, not the careful half-hug she usually gave under the social worker's watchful eye. And in that moment, I'd felt a spark of hope that maybe, despite everything Jessica was doing to undermine us, the connection between my grandchildren and me was stronger than her manipulation. But hope was dangerous. It made the disappointments hurt more. Like the time Marcus asked if he could bring a friend to our next visit, and Jessica denied permission because she didn't want my influence extending to other children. Or when Lily wanted to stay overnight so we could go to a craft fair the next morning, and Jessica refused because overnight visits weren't specified in the court order. Every restriction, every denial, every small cruelty was Jessica's way of maintaining control even after losing the legal battle. She couldn't keep me from seeing the children, but she could make sure those interactions happened on her terms, constrained by her rules, limited in ways that prevented us from developing the kind of deep, easy relationship I'd once had with them. The hearing about visitation interference finally arrived, and once again I found myself in a courtroom watching Jessica perform her victim act. She'd brought Lily and Marcus this time, a calculated move to show the judge that the children were fine, that there was no need to modify the existing order. Seeing my grandchildren sitting in the courtroom gallery, watching their mother and grandmother fight in a legal setting, made me physically ill. This was exactly what I'd wanted to avoid. They shouldn't be witnesses to this conflict, shouldn't have to watch the adults in their lives battle over access to them. But Jessica had no such qualms. She put on a show of devoted motherhood, talking about how she was trying to provide stability for her children during this difficult time, how she was working so hard to help them understand that I wasn't a bad person, just someone who was going through some challenges. James countered with documentation. The comments the children had made revealing Jessica's negative statements about me. The phone call records showing interruptions during visitation time. The denied requests for extended visits that would have enriched the children's relationship with me. The family tree project that showed how effectively Jessica had marginalized my role in their lives. The judge had listened carefully to both sides, asked pointed questions, and then made a ruling that surprised me. Mrs. Hutchins, I'm deeply concerned by the evidence showing your continued interference with Mrs. Chen's relationship with her grandchildren. The purpose of grandparent visitation is not to provide minimal legal compliance, while undermining the relationship through other means. I'm modifying the order to include the following provisions. No disparaging comments about Mrs. Chen to or around the children. No unnecessary interruptions during scheduled visitation time. Permission for occasional extended visits including overnight stays at Mrs. Chen's discretion. And most importantly, these visits will no longer require a social worker's presence. Mrs. Chen has demonstrated she's a fit and loving grandmother, and these children need to be able to rebuild their relationship with her without constant supervision. Jessica's face had gone white. The removal of the social worker meant she'd have less visibility into what happened during our visits, less control over the narrative. The overnight stays meant Lily and Marcus would have extended time to bond with me without Jessica's immediate influence. Your Honor, Jessica's attorney had stood quickly. My client has concerns about unsupervised visits given Mrs. Chen's previous confusion about financial and legal matters. The judge had given the attorney a look that could have frozen water. Counsel, we've already established in these proceedings that Mrs. Chen was not confused. She was deliberately defrauded by your client. Let's not rewrite history. The modified order stands. Walking out of that courtroom, I'd felt something shift. Not victory exactly, but a sense that maybe the tide was turning. Maybe the truth was finally strong enough to overcome Jessica's manipulation. Maybe my grandchildren would have a chance to know me without her poison constantly dripping into their understanding of who I was. The first unsupervised visit happened 2 weeks later. Jessica dropped the children off with visible reluctance, giving them a long list of instructions about behavior and phone calls and emergencies. I watched her drive away, then turned to Lily and Marcus with a smile. So what should we do first? Marcus had grinned. Can we work on the chair I'm building? Without having to stop early. Absolutely. And Lily, I thought we could bake a pie for dessert. A real one from scratch that takes time to do properly. We'd spent that afternoon in comfortable companionship, not rushing to fit everything into a 4-hour window, not performing for a social worker taking notes. Just a grandmother and her grandchildren, doing ordinary things that felt extraordinary, because they'd been denied for so long. During lunch, Lily had asked a question I'd been dreading. Grandma, why does Mom get so angry when we talk about you? I'd put down my sandwich, choosing my words with the care they deserved. Your mom and I had a serious disagreement about some important things. Sometimes when people hurt each other, even accidentally, it takes a long time to heal. Your mom is still hurting, and that hurt sometimes comes out as anger. But you're not angry, Marcus observed. You seem sad sometimes, but not angry. I am sad, I'd admitted. I'm sad that our family has been broken in ways that are hard to fix. But I'm trying not to be angry because anger doesn't help anyone. It especially doesn't help you too, and you're what matters most to me. Lily had been quiet for a moment, then said, Mom says you tried to take money from her. That you got confused and thought she owed you something when really you'd given it to her to take care of. There it was. Jessica's version, planted firmly in her daughter's mind. I could contradict it, could explain the legal judgment, could defend myself against the accusation. But would that help Lily? Or would it just force her to choose between believing her mother or believing me? Lily, there was a disagreement about money and property. A judge looked at all the evidence and made a decision about how things should be resolved. But here's what I want you to understand. Whatever happened between your mom and me, it doesn't change how much I love you and your brother. It doesn't change that I'm your grandmother, and that you're important to me. The grown-up problems are separate from my relationship with you. But whose version is true? Marcus asked with 8-year-old directness. The judge's version is what matters, I'd said carefully. And the judge said certain things needed to happen to make things fair. But you don't need to worry about understanding all the legal details. You just need to know that you're loved, by me and by your mom, even if we have problems with each other. It wasn't a perfect answer. It didn't give them the clear truth they deserved. But it was the best I could do without putting them in the impossible position of having to decide which adult to believe. They'd figure out the full truth eventually, when they were old enough to understand court documents and legal judgments. Until then I'd give them what I could. A safe place, honest answers when possible, and unconditional love. The overnight visit started a month later. Lily came first, just her, for a Friday night sleepover. We made elaborate breakfasts, watched old movies, stayed up late talking about books and dreams and all the things teenage girls think about when they're trying to figure out who they're becoming. At one point, curled up on the couch with hot chocolate, Lily had asked, "What was my mom like when she was my age?" I'd pulled out photo albums I hadn't looked at in years. Pictures of Jessica at 10, at 12, at 15. Young and bright-eyed and still capable of genuine joy. I told Lily stories about her mother's childhood, carefully selecting ones that showed Jessica's good qualities. Her determination when learning to ride a bike. Her creativity with art projects. Her protective instincts toward younger children at school. "She seems different in these pictures," Lily said, studying a photo of teenage Jessica laughing at something just outside the frame. "Happier." "She was happy then," I'd said truthfully. "She had her whole life ahead of her and so many possibilities. Growing up changes people, sometimes in ways we don't expect." "Do you think she still loves you?" Lily asked. "Even though you fight?" The question hit harder than I'd expected. Did Jessica love me? Had she ever truly loved me, or had I always been just a resource to be managed, a source of support to be exploited? "I think your mom loves you and Marcus more than anything," I'd said, sidestepping the direct question. "Whatever's happening between us doesn't change how much she cares about being your mother." It was the most generous thing I could say about Jessica, and even that felt like a stretch. But Lily needed to believe her mother loved her. I wouldn't take that away, even if my own relationship with Jessica was broken beyond repair. The visits continued, and slowly, gradually, my relationship with Lily and Marcus began to heal. It would never be what it was before Jessica's betrayal. There would always be scars, always be caution, always be the knowledge that their mother had tried to erase me from their lives. But we were building something new, something that belonged to us rather than existing only in the shadow of what had been lost. Marcus finished his chair and started on a bookshelf. Lily filled 3 journals with stories and poems. We planted a garden together, vegetables and flowers that would grow and bloom long after our visits ended. We created traditions, Friday night movie marathons, Saturday morning pancakes with elaborate toppings, Sunday afternoon craft projects that left glitter and paint on every surface. And through it all, I documented everything. Photos of projects completed, copies of stories written, records of conversations and growth, and the slow rebuilding of trust. Because I knew Jessica would challenge the visitation again. People like her don't give up control easily. She was biding her time, looking for an opportunity to claim I was a negative influence, to restrict access once more. That opportunity came 9 months after the modified visitation order. Marcus had come home from a weekend visit with a scraped knee from falling while we were hiking. Nothing serious, just a typical childhood injury that we cleaned and bandaged and treated with ice cream. But Jessica had called the police, claiming I'd endangered her child through negligent supervision. The investigation was brief and found no wrongdoing. Children fall. Hiking involves some risk. I'd responded appropriately to a minor injury. But Jessica used the incident to file yet another motion, this time requesting that outdoor activities be prohibited during visitation. We were back in court again, and I was so tired of courtrooms and judges and having to defend my right to have a normal grandparent relationship with my grandchildren. But I showed up with my documentation, my photos of Marcus proudly showing off his bandaged knee like a badge of honor, my records of appropriate first aid. The judge had been less patient with Jessica this time. "Mrs. Hutchins, children get injured during normal activities. That's part of childhood. If we prohibited grandparent visitation every time a child scraped a knee, no grandparent in this country would be allowed to see their grandchildren. This motion is denied, and I'm warning you that continued frivolous filings will result in sanctions." Small victories, each one feeling simultaneously significant and exhausting. Because even though I kept winning in court, I kept losing in the daily reality of trying to maintain a relationship with children, whose mother was determined to sabotage every connection we built. The financial situation had stabilized. Jessica had finally paid back all the money she'd stolen, though it had taken over a year and multiple court orders. My emergency fund was rebuilt. The house repairs were complete. I had steady income from my tutoring and editing work. Materially, I'd recovered from what Jessica had done. But the emotional recovery was ongoing, maybe lifelong. Dr. Brennan had warned me that trauma like this doesn't have a clean endpoint where you suddenly feel better and move on. It's something you carry and process and integrate into who you become. You're not the same person you were before this happened, she told me. And that's not necessarily bad. You're more cautious, yes, but also more resilient. You know what you're capable of surviving. You know who you can trust and who you can't. That knowledge, as painful as it was to acquire, is valuable. I'd started speaking at senior centers about elder financial abuse, sharing my story with groups of people who nodded in recognition because similar things had happened to them or people they knew. The statistics were staggering. 1 in 10 seniors experiences some form of financial exploitation, and family members are the perpetrators in 90% of cases. After one presentation, an elderly man had approached me with tears in his eyes. My son did something similar, he'd said. Took out credit cards in my name, forged my signature on a reverse mortgage, left me with nothing. I was too ashamed to fight back, too afraid of what people would think if they knew my own child had robbed me. Hearing your story, knowing I'm not alone, it helps. That conversation had crystallized something for me. My suffering had a purpose beyond my own healing. By speaking out, by refusing to be silenced by shame or family loyalty, I was helping other victims recognize that they weren't crazy, weren't ungrateful, weren't the problem. The exploitation was the problem. The betrayal was the problem. And it was okay to fight back against it, even when the perpetrator was your own child. I'd started a support group that met monthly at the community center. A circle of seniors who'd been financially exploited by family members, who were navigating the complicated emotions of seeking justice against people who were supposed to love and protect them. We shared strategies for recovery, both financial and emotional. We celebrated victories and supported each other through setbacks. One woman in the group, Rita, had been defrauded by her daughter-in-law in a scheme almost identical to what Jessica had done to me. Her story was so similar it was eerie. The isolation from friends, the manipulation about cognitive decline, the spa day distraction while locks were changed. These predators were using the same playbook because it worked. Rita and I became close friends, bonded by our shared experience of betrayal. We'd meet for coffee and talk about our grandchildren, our legal battles, our slow progress toward feeling like ourselves again. She understood in a way that even Helen couldn't, because she'd lived through the same specific nightmare. Do you ever wish you just let them have it? Rita asked me once. Just signed over the house and the money and walked away instead of fighting? I'd considered the question seriously. Sometimes, when I'm tired of court dates and legal fees and constantly having to prove I'm competent to manage my own life. But then I think about what message that would send. That it's okay to prey on vulnerable people as long as they're family. That there are no consequences for this kind of betrayal. And I think about other victims who need to know it's possible to fight back. So no, I don't wish I'd let it go. But I do wish I hadn't needed to fight in the first place. Helen had become more than a neighbor over these years. She'd become my closest friend, my advocate, my chosen family in a way that felt more real than my biological connection to Jessica ever had. She'd been there for every court appearance, every difficult visit with the grandchildren, every moment of doubt and despair. You know what amazes me about you? Helen said one evening as we sat on her porch watching the sunset. You didn't let this make you bitter. You're still kind, still generous, still willing to help other people even after your own daughter tried to destroy you. I'm bitter sometimes, I'd admitted. Late at night when I can't sleep, thinking about everything Jessica took from me. Not just the money or the property, but the relationship we could have had. The grandmother I could have been to Lily and Marcus if she hadn't poisoned them against me. The peace I could have had in my later years instead of this constant legal warfare. I'm bitter about all of it. But you don't stay in that bitterness, Helen observed. You feel it, you process it, and then you choose something else. That's strength, Margaret. Real strength, not the pretend strength of never feeling hurt. Maybe she was right. Maybe surviving this had revealed reserves of resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Or maybe I'd always been strong and just hadn't needed to prove it, until Jessica forced me to fight for everything that mattered. The second year after the trial brought changes. Derek and Jessica's marriage began to crumble, which I learned about through Lily's carefully worded comments during our visits. Dad was working all the time. Mom was always stressed about money. They argued a lot, usually about bills and debt and whose fault it was that they were in financial trouble. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, just sadness that Lily and Marcus were caught in the middle of yet another adult conflict. Divorce seemed inevitable, which would mean more upheaval, more instability, more chaos in my grandchildren's lives. When the divorce papers were finally filed, Jessica called me for the first time in nearly 2 years. Her voice on the phone was strange, simultaneously familiar and foreign. "Mom, I need to talk to you." My hand had tightened on the phone. "I'm listening." "Derek's leaving me. He says we're drowning in debt because of the judgment I owe you. He's filing for divorce and trying to claim I mismanaged our marital finances." "I see." I kept my voice neutral, not offering the sympathy she seemed to be angling for. I was thinking, maybe we could work something out. If you'd agree to forgive part of the debt, I could save my marriage. The kids need their father. They need stability. This divorce is going to devastate them. There it was. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just another manipulation. Another attempt to use my love for my grandchildren as leverage to get what she wanted. "Jessica, the debt exists because you stole from me. A court determined that you owe me that money plus interest. I didn't create this situation. You did." "I know things got complicated," she'd said, as if fraud and exploitation were just complications. "But I'm your daughter. Doesn't that count for something? Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me and help me save my family?" Forgiveness. She wanted forgiveness without repentance, without making amends, without even acknowledging the full scope of what she'd done. She wanted me to absolve her so she could avoid the consequences of her own actions. "I've forgiven you," I'd said, and meant it. "I've let go of the anger because carrying it was hurting me more than it was hurting you." But forgiveness doesn't mean erasing consequences. You made choices that had legal and financial implications. Those implications are yours to deal with. So you're just going to let my marriage fall apart? Let your grandchildren lose their family? Your marriage is falling apart because of choices you and Derek made, not because I'm enforcing a legal judgment. And Lily and Marcus will always have family. They have me. Assuming you stop trying to keep them from me. She'd hung up without another word. And I'd sat holding the dead phone, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Sadness that my daughter was in pain. Relief that I'd held firm against her manipulation. Worry about what this would mean for Lily and Marcus. The divorce proceeded rapidly and messily. Derek fought for custody, claiming Jessica's financial problems and legal troubles made her unfit. Jessica countered that Derek had been complicit in the exploitation of me, and was equally responsible for their financial situation. I stayed out of it as much as possible, not wanting to be weaponized in their battle against each other. But the family court judge requested my input on custody arrangements, specifically whether I thought either parent was unfit. I'd been honest. Jessica had committed fraud and exploitation against me, which spoke to serious character flaws. But she loved her children, provided for their basic needs, and had been their primary caregiver for their entire lives. Derek had been complicit in the theft of my property, but had also been a present father. The judge had awarded joint custody with Jessica as primary custodian, which meant the children would still live primarily in her household, but spend significant time with Derek as well. The arrangement actually worked in my favor because it meant more opportunities for visits. If the kids were going back and forth between parents anyway, adding visits with me to the rotation felt less disruptive. Jessica's financial situation continued to deteriorate. She'd had to sell the house, my house that she'd stolen and been forced to return, to pay off debts and legal fees. She moved into a small apartment with the children, a massive downgrade from the lifestyle she'd been trying to maintain. Her bitterness was palpable during the few interactions we had, usually related to coordinating visitation schedules with the kids. I felt no triumph in watching her struggle, just a weary sense that justice had been served even though the costs had been high for everyone involved. Lily and Marcus were dealing with divorced parents, financial instability, and the continued tension between their mother and grandmother. They'd lost innocence and security that should have been their birthright. But they were resilient, as children often are. They adapted to the new arrangements, grew comfortable moving between households, learned to navigate the complicated family dynamics with increasing sophistication. And our relationship continued to deepen as they got older and better understood what had actually happened. On Lily's 13th birthday, she'd asked me directly about the court case. She'd pulled up the public records on her phone, read the judge's decision, and confronted me with it over birthday cake. "Mom really did steal from you, didn't she? It wasn't just a misunderstanding or confusion. She actually planned to take your house and your money." I'd taken a deep breath, knowing this conversation had been coming but still unprepared for it. "Yes, that's what happened. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you let me think it was just some complicated adult disagreement?" "Because you were 10 years old and caught in the middle of something that wasn't your fault or your responsibility. You needed to have a relationship with your mom without feeling like you had to choose sides or judge her for her worst mistakes." Lily had been quiet for a long time, processing this. "I don't know how to feel about this. She's my mom. I love her. But what she did to you was really wrong." "Both things can be true," I told her. "She's your mom and you love her. She also made terrible choices that hurt me deeply. You don't have to reconcile those things or figure out how they fit together. You just have to love who you love and be honest about what's real." That conversation had marked a shift. Lily and Marcus were old enough now to understand the full truth, to see their mother clearly without the filter of childhood idealization. It didn't make them love Jessica less, but it did make them more cautious with her, more protective of me, more aware of the complicated nature of family loyalty. Marcus, now 11, had started asking questions about money management and legal protections. He wanted to understand how to protect himself from being exploited, how to recognize manipulation, how to ensure he never became either a victim or a perpetrator of financial abuse. I taught him what I'd learned, shared the hard-won wisdom that had cost me so much to acquire. The support group I'd started had grown to over 20 regular members, with a waiting list of people who wanted to join. We'd expanded to meet twice monthly, and I'd started training some of the longer-term members to facilitate their own groups in neighboring communities. Elder financial abuse was an epidemic, and victims needed support and resources to fight back. I'd been interviewed by local news outlets about my work with the group and my own experience with Jessica's fraud. The publicity brought both support and backlash. Other victims reached out thanking me for speaking up, but I also received angry letters accusing me of being a vengeful mother destroying her daughter's reputation, of airing family business publicly, of being unforgiving and bitter. Jessica herself sent me one of those letters. Pages of accusations and justifications and self-pity. How could I humiliate her publicly like this? Didn't I care about her children seeing news stories about their mother being called a criminal? How was she supposed to rebuild her life when I kept telling everyone what she'd done? I'd read the letter once and filed it with the other court documents, a record of her continued refusal to take responsibility for her own actions. There was no point responding. No words that would make her understand that my speaking out wasn't about punishing her, but about helping other victims. Dr. Brennan and I had continued our therapy sessions, though less frequently now. Once a month instead of weekly, focusing on maintenance and ongoing processing rather than crisis management. "You've done remarkable work," she told me during one session. "You've taken one of the worst experiences a person can have and transformed it into purpose. You're helping people, rebuilding your relationship with your grandchildren, creating a life that matters. That's not just survival. That's thriving." Maybe she was right. Maybe I was thriving in my own complicated way. I had meaningful work. I had genuine friendships. I had Lily and Marcus growing older and closer to me with each passing year. I had a home that was truly mine, protected by legal documentation and personal vigilance. I had a community of people who understood what I'd survived and admired my resilience. What I didn't have was the family I thought I had. The devoted daughter who turned out to be a predator. The son-in-law who'd helped her steal from me. The simple, uncomplicated love of grandchildren who hadn't been used as pawns in adult warfare. Those things were gone, mourned, and slowly being replaced by new realities that were more honest if less comfortable. On the 3rd anniversary of the trial, I sat in my living room surrounded by photos of Lily and Marcus, letters from support group members thanking me for my help, documentation of every legal victory, and every hard-won inch of recovery. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, desperate and broken and locked out of her own house. And I thought about the woman I'd become, scarred but strong, cautious but still capable of trust, damaged but not destroyed. Jessica had tried to erase me, tried to take everything that mattered and leave me with nothing. But I'd fought back. I'd survived. And I'd built something new from the rubble of what she'd destroyed. It wasn't the life I'd imagined in my 70s. It was harder and lonelier in some ways, more complicated and painful. But it was mine. Truly mine. No one had given it to me or could take it away. I'd claimed it through sheer stubborn refusal to disappear quietly like Jessica had planned. And that, I realized, was its own kind of victory. Not the kind that comes with trumpets and celebrations, but the quiet triumph of still being here, still mattering, still making a difference in the world despite someone's best efforts to make me small and silent and gone. I was 75 now, still tutoring, still running the support group, still having visits with Lily and Marcus, still making payments on my house and managing my finances with the caution of someone who's learned the hard way to trust but verify. Still here, still standing, still me. And Jessica, wherever she was in her own journey through the consequences of her choices, would have to live with the knowledge that she tried to destroy her own mother and failed. That despite everything she'd taken, I'd survived and rebuilt and thrived without her. That was the real ending to this story. Not revenge, not reconciliation, but the simple fact of my continued existence. The fact that I was still here, still valuable, still loved by people who chose to love me rather than being obligated by biology. Jessica had given me a spa day and stolen my house. But in trying to erase me, she'd inadvertently revealed who I really was underneath all the roles I'd played. Not just a mother or a widow or a victim, but a person with inherent worth and dignity that existed independent of any relationship or possession. That person was who I'd fought for. And that person was who'd won. 5 years passed. Lily graduated high school and chose the university near my house. She visits weekly now by choice, not court order. Marcus builds furniture in Raymond's workshop, selling pieces online. Jessica remarried, moved away. We exchange polite messages on holidays, nothing more. The support group I started now runs in 12 cities, helping hundreds of seniors fight back against family exploitation. My hair turned silver, my hands grew more wrinkled, but I'm still here. Still teaching, still advocating, still loving my grandchildren fiercely. Jessica tried to erase me from my own life. Instead, she taught me I'm erasable only if I allow it. I chose differently. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.